Greetings to all. We are hosts of Àgèlògbàgàn Agbovi I, the paramount monarch of Ganlodo, the only African maroon African monarchy in the world, and we say that from the perspective of that's unfortunate, you know. But that's just a fact. Our website is restorationhealing.com. Get that out the way. We want to make this video as short as possible. This video is about what we call Huendo Bedopo, and that is in the phone language, the Aja phone language, cultural congruence, cultural agreement, and we'll get right to it. And this is part of not only the cultural clarification series that we started, but also this goes in line with the Reafrikanization process, right? We asked in one video, how far are you willing to go in your Reafrikanization process, you know? And we're not talking about doing crazy things, stupid things, not talking to your family and all that. We don't believe in any of that. You know? We're talking about doing things that we have control over, you know, accountability. So we have Obinrin, we have Okunrin. Obinrin is the women, Okunrin are the men. So we were looking at a National Geographic magazine yesterday, and they talking about these so-called Native Americans that want to retell their stories, because a lot of the stories weren't correct that the European wrote in relation to their narrative, right? And just to get straight to the point, every last one of those so-called Native Americans, with all their complaints and all this talking they're doing and rewriting stories and dressing up for the magazine and whatnot, every last one of them had Yovo names, European names. One so-called model, her name was Bouvier. That was a laugh out loud moment right there. And we remember noting, even in the magazine, not just in our Ori in our head, you know, how can they expect to be taken serious with names like that? Let's segue into African people in America. And we're talking about mainly new African people, you know, Africans in the Itankale, the so-called diaspora. And I know they're messing up with these names over there in Mawufe also, but we're talking about Mawufe no Meto Yo-Yo, you know, new Africans, you know, Africans outside of the continent. And so we can go various ways with this, but one of the things we thought about is like a lot of the sisters. We met some sisters that claim to be really hardcore. And that's Obinrin, the women. We're gonna go to the men in a second. But this affects the women in a particular way. Just bear with us for a second. They're saying that they want African men and they're in African traditions and you know, and we'll literally, you know, a lot of times, just like a lot of the brothers, bash these foreign religions. And that's one thing. That's what they want to do. You know, we have no love for the foreign religions either, or the foreigners that brought them. But however, when you claim you want an African man and you marry a man with a European, or you're seriously dating or then marry a man with a European name, right? What are you passing on to your children? Because we found out in certain states, the child has to have the last name of the parents. And it may be the male in some cases, not quite sure. Not quite sure if it's based on, but definitely if they're married, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna have the last name that the man brought in. And so now this woman that has been talking all this African talk for so long, despising European names, may have been even given a European name herself, but rejects it. Now she got a full European name, when she marries this man that has a non-African name. And 9 times out of 10, this particular kind of man is probably not even, he could care less about being African, care less about being, names are not that important. So that's one aspect of it. So let's say you're given a name at birth, Trisha, Carmen, whatever, and your last name is African though, right? But you marry a cat that does not have an African last name. Now, we're going to tell you something right quick. Those guys, so in our tradition, the woman can keep her name. She doesn't really traditionally take on the last name of the man. However, if you're dealing with a man that is not about culture, he is not finna hear that. You're going to have his last name, or y'all probably won't be married. Just that simple. So now let's say your mother or your father, whoever, gave you a European first name, but you have an African last name. Now this applies to more to first generation born Africans that their parents were born on the continent, but they were born here. Because this happens oft the time with people from the continent. They name their children European first names, right? So now your first name is European, but you may reject that. But then you marry a guy that has a European last name. Now at first you didn't have a European last name. So we think that you can see where we're going with this dilemma. How serious are we? How serious were we when we said, we reject European culture to the best of our ability, still being in the midst of it. But we're talking about things we can choose, Let's say you change your name. You go through all that trouble to change your name. Then you marry a guy who doesn't have that kind of name and is not trying to have that. And he's not trying to hear that about you keeping your previous name either. We're not talking about hyphenated. In our culture, we don't do the hyphenated per se. Well, we don't. So it won't be hyphenated. You still have your name. But these people that these sisters are getting with, and we're talking about sisters that claiming to be cultural, are not about culture. So they're not going for that. You are going to have that last name. It's going to be Douglas, McCants, whatever. And now here you're breeding, even though you're not racially doing it, you're breeding the African out of your lineage. That's what you're doing. Point blank. It's simple as that. So your family goes from having full African names to one European name to 2 European names, and eventually that fades out. So that tells us that you're not in Begdopo, congruence with Gwendo, the culture. We changed our name 22 years ago. We're going on 23 years ago now. When we saw we European name was not for us because we're African, so we changed our name. It was just that simple. It was that simple. Wasn't no if, and, or but. No matter what sacrifice we had to do for that. So now let's flip over to the Okunri, to the men. Now, this mainly applies to men that are in the culture, or claim to be in the culture, and that's a questionable term, because we wonder what they really mean when they say the culture. But we're just using their terminology. So these men, they claim to be in the culture, but they don't change their names. Then they marry somebody, and so now they're also responsible for this sister having another non-African name. How many plantations are you willing to be on in your life? That's the question. We go from the Coleman plantation to the Douglas plantation to the McCants plantation. Let's say you get married twice, and then, come on. And this on the side of the Okunri, the men, why are you passing plantation on when you're talking all this black power stuff? Now, you're using African names in certain circles. That's not good enough. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. Because when people refer to you in the legal sense and whatnot, and in the future, they're going to have to go back to that European name. Many of your African scholars that you love so much, they have European names. Had all the opportunity they could, had a better opportunity than you do, because it costs more now. You have to go through more loops. But back then, they could have changed their name. And real quick, it would have been nothing. Cost next to nothing. But they didn't do that. You have to question that. Don't think we're trying to, we're not mentioning any names, but you got to question that. Seriously. Like, these people are supposed to be your leaders, but they ain't got the wherewithal to change their name to the name that they're using all the time in front of you. When you have to write a check, when you have them at those little lectures and whatnot they love to do, when you write that check, look at the name that you have to write that check in. Because if you put it in any of those European names, African names that they use, they wouldn't be able to cash it. They wouldn't be able to cash their own money. So this is a double-edged sword, because the men are not doing anything about their name situation, and we're now talking to the men that claim to be African. See, previously we were talking about the obedient, the women who end up with men that ain't really even about that. Now we're talking to the men that say they're about that, but they have refused to change their name for whatever reason. And so now your children have these names. See, this is what we're talking about, Atebaye. In the Yoruba language, that means intergenerational, right? So what you're doing now is passing on confusion to your children. You're passing on confusion to your enemy. Because your enemy is like, well, I thought y'all said y'all was about this. I was a little scared at first. However, your child is named Babatunde Bailey. Come on. And it's on you. Now they still got to change their name. So hopefully a warrior spirit, a warrior Kulita ancestor will come through them and say, you know what, enough is enough. I'm finna change my name. You know. So we're a little confused about what's going on with the brothers and the sisters. You know, the brother running around here, they talking about their name as, let's say, Ifa Bami or something like that. That means Ifa loves me, Ifa cares for me, protects me, really, in the Yoruba language, right? And you know him as that, you know, when you see him. You know him as that on Sunday at the Ile. But his real name is Charles. Write him a check and see what you got to write in here. Charles. Last name, some other European last name, you know. So what are we really saying? Are we really, how can you be taken serious? How can you be taken serious when you are engaged in such anti-African behavior? How can you be taken serious? So anybody that's engaged in that kind of stuff, they can't come and talk to us about African culture unless they want to sit and learn and correct their waywardness. That's it. Other than that, we have nothing to talk about. We can help you de-Europeanize your mind and re-Africanize, but other than that, it's nothing to talk about. It's nothing to talk about. So think about that. You know, this is somewhat of an epidemic. We keep running into these children and we see their names as such and such and such, but then go and pick up one. Have to go, like, let's say one of your friends got children at school. You know, watch what name you have to ask for when you go to that school. It's not going to be all them pretty sounding African names. No, it's going to be something like Todd. You know, because that's what they done named their children. Maybe they have African first name, but their last name, they're gonna, man, what's the last name? Johnson. You know, this is what we're dealing with. So that's something to think about. So basically, one of the points in a nutshell that we're trying to make is quit playing. You know, it's time out for all this pontificating, all this talking loud, and you know, talking to certain people that, let's say, they might not be as educated about African culture and whatnot, so it kind of sounds a little cute to them and whatnot. They're not really biting the bait though, because they're not in the culture, or they're not trying to come to the culture. Because see, these people have more sense than y'all think. You know, a lot of these Christians and Muslims, you know, people really think the Christians are stupid. They see you. They see you using this European, they see you using this African name, but they know you by this European name. They know this. So quit playing with culture. Step out of the way and let the people that do real culture do culture. Odigba.